This episode is brought to you by Credit Karma. When it comes to your money, Credit Karma keeps you ahead of the game. You can count on Credit Karma to keep up with your financial needs as they evolve, helping you monitor your progress and giving you personalized recommendations so you can make strides towards your goals. Make sure you're on the right track, no matter where you are on your financial journey. Intuit Credit Karma. Karma you can count on. Download today.
Big tax changes this year could mean a bigger refund, and Jackson Hewitt knows how to get you your biggest. You'll get $100 just to try us. That won't make you filthy rich, but definitely gas plus groceries rich. And since we know all the new tax codes, you could get thousands back, which would make you low-key loaded. Or at least wealthy adjacent? Go with our trusted pros and get $100 to switch. Rest easy. Jackson Hewitt's got your taxes. Guaranteed. Limited time offer for new clients. Participating locations only. Details at jacksonhewitt.com.
This is Jay Scott, and you are listening to The Hook, the Ultimate Rock Community Podcast. Hope everyone's having a good day. What's going on, everybody? Hope everyone is listening to music they love, turned on to something new, or enjoying something they've listened to before. We'd like to welcome back Chris Bishop back to the podcast. Chris was on a previous episode discussing physical versus digital format and how we absorb music. Brought him back to the show to discuss the impact of Napster versus Metallica back in 2000. What's going on, Chris?
Not much, Jay. Thanks a lot for having me back on. This is a great topic. I'm excited.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic that I've always changed my point of views over time. You know, like maybe like 10 years ago, I felt differently about it than I do now. When it first happened, I was more angry at Metallica because maybe I didn't understand what the whole blow up was about. You know, when you started the peer-to-peer file sharing in 2000, when Napster was around and probably at the height of its popularity, it was awesome. You know, you were a music fan and you were able to get music for free. And at the time, that was 19 years ago, I was in my 20s, and I didn't understand what I was doing and how it impacted the artists that I loved. I just felt it was awesome, and I could get any song that I wanted, or most songs that I wanted. And it was kind of like making an endless mixtape that we used to do when we were younger. What was your initial thoughts when Napster came to be?
Well, full disclosure, I never actually used Napster. I tried, and it took so long, you know, or on dial-up and stuff like that. So, you know, I just didn't, frankly, have the patience. And plus, you know, I've always had an awesome stereo. So more about quality of sound than how much I pay for it. But I followed the trajectory of Napster pretty closely. And my first impression was, you know, holy crap, this is a hand grenade being thrown into this, traditional business model. You know, the labels have always sort of practiced sort of hand-picking artists through the A&R, you know, the artist and repertoire development process, and then, you know, relentlessly marketing those artists and then squeezing content, you know, limiting access to content, prop up artificially high prices for their products. So my response was, you know, well, good for the people, man. Take it back. Music should be available for people to listen to. You know, certainly the copyright issue was huge. I'm like, I don't know how this is going to play out, but I think it's great that, you know, that people can listen to lots of different stuff without having to pay list price, you know, $18-19 for a CD just to hear, you know, one or two tracks that they like. So, you know, the Metallica lawsuit came down in 2000. I was like, that is a bad look, Lars. You know, I remember there was a website called, you know, paylars.com. I mean, there was this huge backlash against him. And I remember seeing a video clip of a fan saying, "This is probably the most unhit thing I've ever heard a big rock star do." I think he came off, looking pretty petty and all that, but he was right. Copyrights were being infringed by this software platform.
He's even stated in interviews over the last few years how there is some regret with how they approached the whole situation. They basically, it was, shoot first, ask questions later. They didn't really understand the process and what it meant to people. And I don't think anybody did. I don't think there was any artist or band that understood what was happening and how it affected them. They knew it was going to affect them negatively, especially in the bottom line and in the pocketbook. I don't think anybody knew how it was going to change the face of music in terms of how we absorb it. I think there were people on one side that just felt, it was just for people that just wanted to get, like you said, 1 or 2 songs off an album. And then there was still going to be your hardcore, they're going to buy the CD anyway group as well. I think there's a little bit on that at both sides, but now more than ever, as we talked before about the physical versus digital, more and more people are streaming, and that kind of stemmed from Napster. Who knows if that technology would be here today if it wasn't for that? I don't know. No one can really answer that. I do think Metallica was right in regards to the copyright infringement. Lars has stated in interviews that it was more about not getting their permission. It was more about seeing a song that they had recorded that was in their vaults and all of a sudden showing up on radio stations and on Napster, people sharing it, and people had it before they even released it. And that was the song.
Yeah, I believe that was I Disappear.
From the Mission Impossible soundtrack. They had recorded it. Mm-hmm. And then they realized that their whole back catalog was being traded. Right or wrong, I tend to agree with Lars now as I'm older now and understand what the argument was about. These artists do work very hard at perfecting their craft and writing a song and making an album. And for them to lose that revenue, to lose that money, is a big deal. I mean, say what you want. They're millionaires, they're just greedy. Yeah, I understand that point. But also, they did put the work in, and they did put the effort in to bring the music to you, the music that you enjoy. They should be paid for it, and they should be paid handsomely for it. There is a value to music on both sides. There's a value to the fan, and there's a value to the artist making the music.
Yeah, I think part of this is there's a difference between a blockbuster artist and an unsigned band, or sort of a lesser known, not particularly popular artist. So for Metallica, this represented a gigantic threat. I mean, they were a huge band. I remember when the Black Album came out, it debuted at #1. I mean, these guys, were on a lot of records. The status quo was serving them very well, and they'd come up through that system. But there are other examples. There's a band during the Napster period called Dispatch, which was an East Coast band, no label affiliation, and they actually found success through Napster. I remember seeing an interview with these guys, and they said, we've been doing our thing on the East Coast, and we built our fan base. We get about 500 people a night, and then we went out to California, where we never had any promotion. It had no radio play or anything, and we showed up these gigs, and there's thousands of people who all discovered them on the Napster platform. For a band like that was a springboard to a career. I mean, frankly, I'd never heard of Dispatch, and you probably haven't either. It's not like they went on to become a blockbuster artist. But
that is probably the biggest positive of the whole streaming and the file sharing era, right? Is artists that would never get discovered before, that were great bands and great musicians, now getting discovered, now having an audience, now finding an audience through word of mouth. I mean, that's really how a lot of these bands became popular in the 70s and 80s. It was word of mouth. You didn't have the digital era back then of people being able to find your music and play your music anywhere, anytime. and they relied on people making mixtapes, small little blurbs in magazines, or, a friend of a friend who borrowed this album from this guy, who gave it to that guy, who put it on 4 mixtapes for these 4 guys, and that's just how it exploded. And I think Metallica was one of those bands that benefited from that old school way of sharing music, and this was more of a digital way of making that happen. But it just got completely out of control.
Right. Let's not forget the uproar about home taping that predated the whole Napster thing. Remember, the music industry had their panties in a bundle about home taping, right?
Right.
And Metallica benefited from that era where people were sharing, mixtapes and just tapes of records that technically illegally copied. So copyright is a long sort of colored history in the music business. But I think it's also important to remember, or at least think about, what the Napster guy's intent was. Sean Fanning, was a kid. He was 14, 15 years old when he started working on the software. And he was interested in finding rare, like, bootleg stuff, according to him. That's his intent never was, he didn't say, here's a great way that we can screw the music industry and, cheat artists out of their copyright. I mean, he wasn't a pirate. He was just a music fan and a tech head kid. The whole thing, really blew up, at that period of our history in sort of the .com era, and became something far broader than what he ever intended. And Sean Parker, who was famously portrayed by Justin Timberlake in the Social Network film about Facebook, he kind of came along and had this vision about, connecting people, creating communities on the internet. At that time, in the late 90s, we really didn't have what we have today, certainly with social media. And these guys met on, something called IRC. I don't know if you remember that. Mm-hmm. Internet Relay Chat. So it was like just a bunch of, internet chat rooms, joining these chat rooms. And that was how people connected. It was a more cumbersome, sort of process than we have today. Parker's vision was more about connecting people through music that they love. So his vision was a little bit broader. And again, neither one of these guys set out to be pirates. They weren't trying to steal anybody's anything. And they ended up revolutionizing an industry that they didn't even understand. So I think it's important to remember that too. There wasn't like the attack of the pirates, the way the music industry sort of tried to portray Napster. So I think that's a kind of an important piece of the story to keep in mind.
I was a big bootleg collector too years ago, and I still pick them up here now and then. But I used to love finding good quality bootlegs of live shows of bands that I liked, especially those of like Van Halen or Led Zeppelin, who didn't really have any live material for you to enjoy their songs live. Mm-hmm. I mean, Led Zeppelin only had The Song Remains the Same, which was basically a movie soundtrack, but never really captured the essence of Zeppelin live. Van Halen didn't have any live recordings. And there were bands that had this large, extensive catalog of bootlegs or bootleg catalog. And it was enticing, to go to the back room of a record store. If you got to know the guys at the local record store, you get invited to the back room where there are boxes of bootlegs, and you could listen to them and decide which ones were good quality and which ones that you wanted to get, from different tours and different set lists. So that was always a big thing for me. Was it hurting the artist? Probably, in terms of, their pocketbook and their bottom line. But, when you're 16, 17, early 20s, you don't really care that much about it. And also too, it added to your fandom of the band, right? You did this because you love the band, and you were still going to buy everything they released anyway. Right? I mean, people that go out and buy rare bootlegs or rarities are not just going to buy that and never enjoy the band's material that they release officially, right? No, you're buying that
Right.
stuff because you're already there. You're already at that level of, I need everything these guys ever released, and I'm going to make sure I find the ones that I want. So yes, so I was a big bootleg collector, and I still have an extensive bootleg collection. And I understand that was...
Yeah, and there were also non-commercially available different versions of recordings. For instance, Peter Gabriel's "In Your Eyes," the album version is, whatever, 3.5 minutes long, but there was also an 8-minute version that was never released. So it's stuff like that, non-commercially available, stuff that we would, find in the bonus tracks on, later CD releases and now digital albums. So there was a lot of that kind of thing. And that was initially, sort of the idea behind Napster is, for people to be able to share stuff like that. And I would say that the artist would never have cared about bootleg taping. That's just more people getting a chance to hear their stuff. And it's more of the music industry that was, in a bundle about bootleg taping as well.
Yeah, I remember.
I'm sure it's illegal.
I remember going to record conventions. They used to have one, and I think they still do, but I think it's quite different now. But they used to have a record convention in the Chicago area once every month, and you could buy old vinyl, old music memorabilia, posters, comic books, whatever. And then there'd be some bootleg dealers, and that's the place that you would go to get your fix, to get your stuff. And a couple of times they got raided by the feds. Feds came in and arrested the bootleg dealers or anyone selling merch that was bootlegged or anything like that. They came in and they took it serious. There was probably 2 or 3 times that happened. And now the show's evolved where they still sell the stuff there. They still sell the bootlegs, but it's like literally under the table. Like you have to know the dealer. Like you can't just walk up to a dealer and like, hey, do you got any bootlegs? And that's like, no, they're going to say no. But yeah, that was happening a lot in the 90s, early 2000s before this all started, because now once this started, everything got put online. Everything was able to be shared. And I get it too. Like if you wanted to get one song off an album of an artist that you didn't like, but you thought this one song was pretty catchy, I get the motivation to get that song for free. Like, I don't want to go buy this band's album or this artist's album because I only like this one song. I get it. Then there's also the quality that you mentioned, in the first part of the conversation. I remember downloading songs and one song sounded great. Like, it sounded perfect. The other song sounded way too loud. It was, it had way of a louder noise to it. And then another one would be completely muffled. So the quality was hit or miss. And I've said this before, and we talked about it in a previous episode that you were on. Streaming services still do not have the level of quality that a CD has. The positive thing about CDs right now is I read an article in Billboard either earlier this week, late last week, about the new Taylor Swift album and the new Tool album, and how both of those recordings have seen an increase in people buying the actual physical copy in CDs, so much so that it's causing the record companies to rethink, are CDs still viable? Which I think is great, if they're having that discussion, because I still think that there is a huge audience that still wants the physical copy. And there are bands in musicians, collectors and whatnot, but just they want that physical connection. And that's been changed. I mean, Napster really has we're 19 years after the lawsuit. So, you figure 20 years since it came out. We're at that point now. We are at a breaking point where I think there was one CD manufacturer that stopped manufacturing actual physical CDs, for the artists to put their music on. I think that happened last year or earlier this year. So we are at that point where it's going to come soon, where people are just going to stop making CDs unless it's a collector edition, unless it's a special edition, or they're only going to carry it at their shows, the physical copy, because now you have the streaming services. Now you're in the digital age. Napster changed the face. They brought all this upon the music industry, whether they wanted to or not. And ever since then, the music industry has been behind the curve. They can't keep up with the improvements in technology and the improvements in streaming and the streaming services and how people get paid and whatnot.
And as we talked about in the other episodes, hip hop and rap artists have pretty much abandoned physical too. So that's not to be underestimated, because those styles of music, those are the dominant genres in terms of sales and popularity. But you're right. I mean, Napster sort of broke the seal on, what I would say the filtering of, music consumers versus music collectors, right? If all you're going to do is stream, you're not a collector. That's not collecting. Even, we've learned in the post MP3 era that MP3s that's not collecting. Now I got like massive hard drive terabytes of music and it's unmanageable. That's not a collection. That's a mess. So I think people are kind of going back a little bit. The vinyl resurgence is great evidence of that, but also, what you're talking about, the Tool thing, really interesting with that packaging. It's insane what the package is. It's a video screen. I mean, but you're right. And the blockbuster artists like that can afford to do that. Put together a very expensive package and still debut at number one. Where artists, are happy to have their music available to more people to discover, kind of thing. Like just the other day, I mentioned Glam Skanks, and you're able to, post that right out to your community, video of a tune for people to check out. I mean, Glam Skanks love that, right? I mean, more people will show up at their show. Maybe they'll buy a CD or, whatever. So there really is there's a hierarchy here that plays into this as well. Blockbuster artists versus just your average everyday lunch bucket artist.
Yeah. And I'm more of whenever I think of stuff like this, I always try to think of the big picture. And when you're talking about new artists, which I think the digital age has been very kind to on one side, right? Because they can get their music to people all over the world and at a very minimal cost. I just did the interview a couple weeks ago with Carl from La Chinga. He talked about, how when they're packaging their music and sending it out, they're sending it out to people in Russia and South America and Japan and all over. And he's like, and that's really, really cool. And that is awesome for a band like La Chinga or a band that, is trying to get a bigger audience. That's a great, great tool. The other aspect of it, though, is, and where it hinders new artists, is how much money they're making off of the recording. So It used to be, an artist would get, upfront money from the record label. They would get so much percentage of the sales, and they were, living high on the hog. If you're a band like Metallica or any of those bands in the 80s and that had a good, decent deal that didn't, give away their life. Mm-hmm. But they were able to make a comfortable living, more than comfortable living in some aspects, based on the recorded music that they were selling. That doesn't happen anymore, right? Money is made through touring. And in order to tour, you either got to get on a good bill or you've got to connect with an audience and get people to the shows. That's also, that's a whole nother conversation, is actually now getting people to the show with things like YouTube and everything, how that's affecting people. So in one aspect, yes, you're able to get your music out and record music and have people listen to it from all over the world. However, if you want to make any sort of living off of music and be a career musician and be a rock star, you got to tour, and you have to tour constantly. You may be able to only take a month, 2 months off to go, and basically you're recording new music during that time. But you constantly have to be on the road selling merch, selling your product, getting the guarantee. Once you get to a certain level, you can make percentages off of beer sales and whatnot, like some bands do, and that's all great. but you really have to work at it now. I mean, I was just talking to someone about Blackberry Smoke, who, I did an episode released earlier this week on their music and their popularity. Those guys are constantly on the road. I mean, I'm going to see them next Friday for the fourth time in the last year in the Chicagoland area. There are many bands that do that throughout. I mean, there's other bands that come 2-3 times a year, where it was before, where many bands would come once like every year, every 9-10 months, and people would come to the shows. But now you have to get out there and you've got to play to make any money. So yes, it's great that they can get to an audience and extend their music out there and have a massive reach of creating new fans. But on the other hand, how many of those people that have that reach are able to put together a tour and tour across the country, tour overseas, and have enough of an audience to make any money? Because that's
you still need the label juice behind it to be able to do a European tour or an extensive US tour with a lot of production value. But you're absolutely right about streaming, for instance. Helps up and coming bands get their music in front of more people, but you got to get on these services. How do you do that? If I'm a new band, I don't know. Who do I call? I mean, if I don't have a manager, I'm probably doing it on my own. So getting on these services is a challenge. And then once you're on there, these streaming rates, I mean, these are fractions of a cent per stream. I just was looking at Digital Music News, and, their sort of benchmark is, how many streams does a band need to have to earn the U.S. monthly minimum wage of $1,472 a month. And, so Napster, the old, essentially the Rhapsody service, pays the highest rate, and that's like $0.015 per stream. So you need 75,000 total plays to earn that monthly minimum. For Apple, you need 200,000. You get down to YouTube, and you gotta have 2.1 million plays to make the U.S. minimum wage monthly wage. So it's I don't know how much up and coming bands were making off of physical. I don't have a good gauge on that, but it's the odd thing to me is that if somebody streams a song if a song gets streamed 1 million times, it's 1 million listens.
Right.
That's a high level of engagement. Whereas if you just look at physical, I don't know how many times I bought something, listened to it once, and then put it on the shelf and never listened to it again. So it's odd to me that bands are getting this high level of engagement with streaming, but being paid less, than more passive sort of model, with physical. So once again, it's the suits that are making the money, and they love this recurring revenue stream. God, I mean, Goldman Sachs just released a report about the music industry. Well, we used to be really bearish on the music industry, stay away from it, but now we love it, because they love these recurring revenue streams. And when you're paying $10 a month, $12 a month, I mean, that's a lot of money that they can count on. They don't have to worry if you're going to go out and buy a CD. You're already signed up.
Yeah.
Every month they're hitting your credit card. And then they can start slicing and dicing those revenue streams too. It's, securitizing them in the same way that they do with, mortgages that led us to, the financial crisis of the last decade. So, this is all very complicated. And it's funny that in the wake of Napster, I mean, everybody wrote off the labels, right? Labels are done. They're dead. Technology has killed them off. And ironically, labels are stronger than ever now as a result of streaming revenues, these recurring revenue streams. So I think that's a sort of an interesting twist, based on the uproar at the time. Billy Corgan, I saw a comment from him. He said, "The future of music is free." You can't stop the technology. The revolution has taken place. Well, that sounded, sage-like at the time, but now it's laughable. It's not free.
Yeah.
We're paying even more and having nothing left over. You don't have anything on the shelf. You don't have anything to listen to if you stop your, subscription to one of these services.
Well, in that conversation I had with Carl Spackler from Lachinga, he also said that you have to, in order for them to get any money from streaming services, there also has to be a time that the song has to be played. I think it's like a minute. So if someone skips over it in a minute or whatever the time is, they don't get anything. So in the age of people not being able to pay attention more than 2 seconds and, clicking and skip, that also affects the artist too, which is really interesting. Mm-hmm. So if someone clicks on a song, if they only listen to the first 30 seconds, like, oh, I've heard this song too much over the last couple of days, I'm going to skip to the next one. They don't get anything. They don't get any money.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah. I didn't know that. And so it's almost like they're monetizing skips, right? Like if you listen to Pandora, if you have a Pandora account, you get a certain number of skips per, day or whatever. And then if you want more skips, then you got to do the paid version. I mean, so it's funny that they're actually, monetizing skipping in the age of short attention spans, right? It's probably not a bad idea.
Right. And yes, I mean, the music industry is going to find out ways to make their money, right? And it took them a while. I still think they're behind the curve on technology, where now they're just I think they've kind of buckled it down a little bit with the month-to-month services that you pay for. Like you said, you're going to get that $12, $14, whatever it is, every month from a listener, whether it's Spotify or Apple or whomever. I mean, I do subscribe to Amazon Music. Mm-hmm. And, the only reason why I do is if I'm traveling or, if I'm sitting in my bed at night doing something on a computer, I can just click on it and just play the artist that I like. But I also, but honestly, based on my CD collection, I still go out and buy the physical copies of CDs. I mean, the streaming service for me is just for the convenience, right? Just for, hey, I want to, listen to, this, or if I pre-ordered a CD and I'm waiting for it. And this just happened with the latest Pete Yorn CD, Caretakers. I pre-ordered it. It didn't arrive when the day the record came out. So I went on Amazon Music and I listened to it, but I already had the CD. It was already in the mail, so to speak, and I was already getting it, but I just wanted to check it out before I got it. I think everyone is at the point where they have some sort of streaming service just because...
Yeah, even if all you do is log on to YouTube, That's...
Right. But it's just like...
Yeah, I was just going to say that, as a collector, I definitely like the convenience of it, as you said, but I also like the preview sort of aspect. As a collector, I don't have unlimited space. Surprisingly enough, the cost of the music isn't as much of an issue as the space that I have available to store the physical copies.
Right.
So I like to be able to listen to something, essentially give it a spin. The same way I might, like if I went to a friend's house, like back in the day, and they'd spin it. I'd be like, oh, that's great, man. I like that. And I'd go buy it. So now I can try it out. I always tell a story like back, I don't know, this was probably 15 years ago. I got on Rolling Stone, just send him a copy list somehow. I was getting Rolling Stone, for free. So I'm reading about all this new music, but I'm not hearing it. I just started working, with iTunes and buying downloads, but I'm like, AFI, this sounds interesting, but I don't really want to buy, this record, but I sure want to hear it. And that's when I originally got my Rhapsody account, was just so that I could hear this music that I was reading about, and stuff that I really liked. I went and bought a physical copy to be CD exclusively. Now I also, will buy vinyl as well as CD. So I use it sort of as a collecting tool as well.
And when you go to a show, my first thing that I do is go to the merch table and look for a CD to buy the band. Sometimes I buy two of them. It means they're $10, $15. sometimes 5 if it's like an EP or a special edition. And there are things that they do have at the merch table that are not sold online that you can't find, which is really cool. There's also stuff that, like, if you try to go on Discogs or on eBay, you know, they've got versions of it that are a couple $100. Well, there it is for $10 right there. I mean, I remember, I think this past year I went to go see Richie Kotzen, and there was a CD that I have not been able to get without entertaining the possibility of spending, you know, $50-$60 on it. And then here I am in front of the merch table looking at the same CD for $12, which is great. I've had experiences where I've gone to live shows and the bands on stage, when you go back, are not even selling the physical copy. Either they don't have it, they didn't make it, or it didn't get delivered yet during the tour. So they're making that money. Obviously, they got to pay for the production of the CD. They got to pay for the money to make it, to produce it. But when you buy something directly at a show, I mean, that money essentially goes straight to their pocket. I mean, obviously the merchandise like T-shirts and, you know, bandanas or wristbands or pins or buttons, that goes directly to the artist. There's a cost to the CDs, I think, that's more than the others, but it's still theoretically going right to them.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, and you might get an opportunity to have a sign. So, like, we mentioned Glam Skanks, I mentioned a couple minutes ago. So when we were at their show, they had their most recent release, which is, I think, a major label release, a large indie. But their first record with their old lead singer is not available, but they were selling it. So we were able to get the old stuff as well as the new stuff, and we got both of them signed by all 4 band members. Which is cool. I mean, on the off chance they hit it big, here I am. Got I knew them when, man. I got their autographs, So that's a benefit of buying the disc at the show as well. You get a chance to maybe meet the artist, get an autograph.
Getting back to Metallica and being the face of the resistance to Napster and file sharing. There were other artists too involved. There were record companies. I think Dr. Dre was involved at some point with his music, and I think was it A&M Records that went after them too. But Metallica really was the face of the fight. Do you think there's
certainly
been
the highest profile? I mean, the RIAA, the Recording Industry Association of America, brought suit against Napster on behalf of all the labels as well. So.
Do you think
but nobody knows who those people are? Everybody knows who Lars is, right?
Right. And I guess that's my question. Metallica, is still selling out stadiums and is still very popular. Do you think it's had an everlasting effect on how people view them? Do you think people have gotten past that? Do you think people still, because I do see Twitter comments every now and then of people bagging on Lars or bagging on Metallica for what they did?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, I think it has had more of a lasting impact, I think, on how people view Lars. Aside from the Napster thing, I mean, Lars is just kind of a tool from what I have read about him. And, but I don't think, I mean, Metallica, they're still hugely popular, but they're not on the cutting edge. I mean, they're not the next thing. They're almost a classic rock act at this point. Yeah, I mean, I think all the hand wringing about, the record industry is suing their own customers and they'll never recover from this, or, Metallica, they're going to go down the tubes because, they're suing their fans or, whatever. That just kind of didn't happen. It didn't play out that way. I think there was a little bit of negative backlash on Metallica, at first, but, now people look back and it's like, oh yeah, that. Oh yeah, that. I forgot all about that.
Well, they actually went after the people that were downloading their music. I mean, I think it was 300,000 names of people who.
200. They actually printed out. I mean, this was a big publicity stunt, right? I mean, Lars pulls up to the Napster offices with this, phalanx of vans, and they printed out every name. 250,000 names. Of people who had violated their copyrights using the Napster platform. And, that I've seen some old footage, news footage of that. And it's a circus. There's fans, there's media, and I guess the Napster guys, like Fanning and Parker, like slipped out the back and went and like watched it all from the street just to kind of see what was going on. But apparently, when Lars went into the building, then he went up to their offices and he said to them, "Hey, nothing personal, guys." And from the Napster guys' perspective, they're like, "Well, what? I mean, why didn't we talk? Why didn't you call us?" And this is the theme that comes up in a lot of the retrospectives from the Napster guys is, look, we wanted to work with the music industry. Sean Fanning, had the vision to create something that didn't exist. Digital distribution of music, peer-to-peer file sharing, decentralized file distribution. None of that existed. This teenage created, he invented it, and instead of trying to work with this technology and figure out how, it could, be good for business, good for fans, good for artists, the music industry didn't understand it and they just shut it down. And these guys all share the same response. They're like, we knew that something was coming, but we had it never occurred to us that they were going to go for full shutdown mode, and just try and destroy it. They assumed that the music industry would embrace it, as a new opportunity. I mean, gosh, they had, 26 over almost 30 million users when they shut down. So that's a huge market that you're just turning it off. Like, nope, sorry. And that's a serious lack of vision and betrays the fact that the music industry is more about lawyers than it is about artists. The music industry defends itself, through illegal means. That's what they do.
Weren't there also people that were being brought into court and being arrested for like downloading thousands and thousands of songs? I do remember having
not even thousands and thousands, Jay. I mean, it's kind of like all those Metallica names that Lars delivered. If you downloaded one song, you were considered a pirate. You were considered in violation. And they sued like 18,000 average American citizens. And I guess the average payout, the average settlement was $4,000. Can you imagine somebody saying to you right now, "Yeah, you got to give us $4,000 for that couple of songs that you downloaded"? It's absurd. It seems like there should have been a serious backlash that did destroy the labels for that. I mean, they went after single moms. A lot of these kids are teenagers, right, on college campuses. There was even a famous case where this elderly woman got sued. It turns out that she hadn't even used the Napster service, but so they didn't care. They were going after everybody, and it's one of those things where it's like, let's go after everybody, all types of people, so that nobody feels safe. With that sort of punitive, kind of legal approach. And I think by rights the labels should have been penalized for that, and they were for maybe a decade. But as we mentioned earlier, they're back with a vengeance now with streaming, and all the people that were wringing their hands about this we're all streaming. We're all doing it.
Yeah. I just think that
short memories.
Yeah, and I've said this multiple times over multiple episodes when I get in this kind of conversation with the physical versus digital. This was the beginning of the end with how people absorb music. And I think the biggest thing that's come out of it, and it is a negative, is how the art of music is absorbed by people. And I think there's less of an appreciation of what you're listening to and who you're listening to now, because there is no album cover. Anyone that downloads an album off of Amazon or iTunes or whatever looks at what the album cover looks like. right? I mean, they only probably see that in articles on Rolling Stone or whatever music site. You'll see the cover of the album.
Thumbnail.
Right. It's just a thumbnail now. So in that aspect, and I think that is what is the disconnect between now how record companies are making music versus the music fan. There are not a lot of new loyal fans being brought up now, right? Everyone who listens, all the young kids now are listening. I even see it with, my son and his friends that, they're friends of bands, but they don't have that, like, I need everything by this band and I need everything. And I'm sure that's out there, but it was so commonplace years ago where I think
now they're more fans of tracks.
Right.
Like, I want to hear Old Town Road, but I mean, who really gives a damn about Little Nas X's, the rest of his catalog,
Exactly. Or, instead of, we've talked about deep cuts, right? And that was, that's been a subject on some of the polls that I run, is the deep cuts don't get the recognition that the more popular songs, because I don't think that there is a appreciation in general. So like artists now release a track, they'll release one or two tracks, and then a few months later they'll drop another track. So there's no album, there's no 10 songs, 12 songs where, hey man, this third song is really great, and it's not the most popular, but it's probably their best. We talked about sequencing in the last episode, and I still want to do a show on that, but think about how that has been changed by the digital era. It's basically now albums, I imagine now that, there's someone probably picking out the order of songs, but there's no like lift, there's no autopilot that a good album has, where once you take off, you're kind of on that same trajectory throughout the whole album. It just kind of lifts you up. There's no, there's some dips in some albums, but it's all based on sequencing. The flow of the album. There's none of that anymore because you don't need to do it. If you're only going to release 5 songs, a lot of bands now are releasing EPs, like some of the newer bands that I really like, the Dirty Honeys, the Joyous Wolves, they release 6-7 song EPs, which is great because they need that material to get onto a tour, get onto a bill, start making some money. But even full-length albums are becoming a thing of the past for the most part, and I think, go ahead, I'm sorry. Or like Metallica, releases Hardwired, and that's a double album. That's got, I don't know how many songs are on it. My son has it, but that was their first album in 4 or 5 years, or probably even longer. Iron Maiden does the same thing. They don't release albums like they did before every 2 years, 3 years, because the cost of production, doesn't equal what they're going to get back from it if they only release 1 or 2 songs, or they release an album that only 1 or 2 songs get any popularity off of.
That's right. And labels are signing artists to track deals, 5 track deals, as opposed to 5 album deals, too, in many cases. That's part of the Napster legacy, right? Is, consuming tracks rather than albums. When, that's the one thing I think that, that Napster did do, was it disaggregated albums. And you couldn't do that before. If you wanted to hear Life During Wartime by Talking Heads, you had to buy Fear of Music. So in the Napster revolution, you could just go download Life During Wartime and listen to that. You didn't have to buy the whole record. And that's a big deal. And, that kind of set the stage for where we are now. It's sort of almost back to the 50s, right? When the 50s were really a singles-based era. We're kind of back to that. And, Napster sort of lit the fuse on the destruction of the album as we know it.
I miss those days, right? I still collect, buy the CDs, but the idea that you can kind of peek into the artist's head in their mind of what they were thinking of when they recorded a full album, like they sat and they wrote these 10, 12 songs. They demoed them, they hammered them out, they recorded them. There were other songs that didn't make the record, but you could see the artist evolve from album to album. And that was so cool, right? You'd wait in anticipation. You'd see the article in the magazine that you were reading that such and such a band is releasing such and such an album on this such and such a date. And you would wait. and you would say, I'm going to the record store like that day to get it. And you'd get it,
right.
and you'd absorb it. You'd open it up.
Out of the box.
Right out of the box. You'd absorb it. You'd listen to all the tracks once. You'd listen to it again. Then you'd start to, after like the third or fourth listen, you'd start to formulate your opinions on what songs were your favorites and what weren't. And then what was really cool, and I love when this happens, is you could not like a song when it, on the album, and then 2 years later, put that same album back on and hear it and be like, wow, that's it. I can't believe I didn't appreciate that before. That's a really good song. There's a relationship with the physical and digital aspect of the music, but there's also the evolution of the fan with your music. There's the appreciation of the song. There's the appreciation of the production of the recording, of how it's a staple in time of what and who and where you were around during that moment.
Yeah, and CD is interesting because it's both physical and digital.
Right.
So the CD is as much as I love it, is problematic because that was predating Napster, right? The CD now you can skip, right? You couldn't. I mean, if you wanted to skip on a vinyl record, hit lift the needle, try and hit the next track right in the groove, or you had to rewind the tape or fast forward. So now with digital, it's I like the song, skip on to the next one. And the other thing about CD that always disappointed me is that they're in the Red Book standard for the CD. There's something called Mode 5 subcodes. So that was where all the metadata was supposed to go. Metadata being album title, artist, track names, track length, that kind of thing. So the record company just said, forget it. They never utilized it. Never utilized that, option to include all the metadata. So you didn't really know what the names of tracks were even at that point. So if you're listening in the car, it's so funny now. Like if you listen to it, to your phone through the car or listen to Sirius, you get metadata. You put a CD and it's like this track one. Thanks. That's real helpful.
Some do and some don't. Not all of them do that though.
Yeah, I mean, each disc has a unique thumbprint, and they've got these services that aggregate all the metadata, and then they recognize the thumbprints of the disc and make that available. But the other thing about the CD is the music industry itself set the table for Napster by releasing all their music in a digital format that wasn't particularly well protected on the disc itself. So Napster wasn't a service that had, the big server farm where all these tracks sat. No, as we've mentioned, it's peer to peer. So all these tracks sat on individual computers around the world, right? And how did those tracks get on those computers? From CDs that people ripped, So the music industry sort of created this problem themselves by unleashing, digital technology into the world without really understanding what the ramifications could be. So in a lot of ways, the Napster thing just sort of, really amplified what was already happening with digital media in the music industry. So I think it's important to remember that too. I mean, Sean Fanning could never have done what he did if the music industry hadn't, rushed to introduce CDs so that then they could obsolete vinyl, right? So that then they could resell all their back catalog in a new format. Because that's the only thing that happens in these format shifts. The only people that win are the record labels. There's no need to kill off a format, right? Why can't we all just get along? You can have vinyl, you can have CD, you can stream. I mean, that's one of the cool things I think that we're moving into in this era is, what I call multi-format generation kind of thing. Like my daughter, I've been collecting records since about the time she was born. Music comes on a big round thing. It comes on a shiny disc. It comes, through her little tablet or whatever. It comes through the radio. I mean, it's everywhere. She doesn't care. It could be a hamster and they're running on a wheel making the sound. She just likes the music. So I think that's cool that, now we're starting to see vinyl and CD and streaming and, high res files and stuff like that all existing together. And there is some, if the Napster revolution exists anywhere today, it's kind of in the vinyl world, right? Because people who collect vinyl are buying a lot of used records. The record industry doesn't get any money from that. Artists don't get any money from that. We're just in this sort of underground community, trading, trading music, not for free, but, we set the value and the people who profit are the independent record stores. Obviously the music industry is now sort of insinuating itself back into there and pressing vinyl again. But there's a lot of facets to this, to the politics of format,
I just read an article a few weeks ago about how for the first time in decades, vinyl has surpassed CDs in terms of sales.
Is that true? I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think, it was like 3 or 4 weeks ago it came out where vinyl, there were more vinyl records sold last year than CDs, which is pretty crazy,
Yeah, that's insane.
What do you think is next? As we close down this discussion, what do you think is, the next thing that's around the corner in terms of technology, in terms of how we absorb music?
Yeah, I wish I had a crystal ball so I could get fabulously wealthy. Although the Napster guys didn't get fabulously wealthy for their massively disruptive technology. Well, I think one thing's for certain is that they're not going to strap music to a disc or tape ever again. There isn't going to be a new physical format, at least not something that's propagated by, the recording industry. And that's one of the reasons, we talked briefly about, my company getting ready to introduce a new CD player, a headphone-based CD player. And one of the reasons that we're doing that and that we're excited about it is because CD is the last collectible format, as far as I'm concerned. And it will have an Indian summer. It won't necessarily be exactly like vinyl, but, if the internet has taught us nothing, it's that if somebody made it, somebody's collecting it, right? So the idea that, this really high resolution music that's available on a physical format right now for pennies almost is going to go away, I think I think that's short-sighted. I mean, no one thought vinyl was going to come back when I was frisbeeing AC/DC and Duran Duran records down my buddy's street back in 1990, So part of what's next, I think, is, a resurgence of CD. You touched on that, with the success of the Tool release and Taylor Swift. I hope high res streaming is next. Neil Young's archives online are, if you're a Neil Young fan and you haven't, dived into that a little bit, it's really cool. He's got high res streaming versions of, all his archives, tons of stuff that was never released. So hopefully that's part of the future where these blockbuster artists just sort of have their own thing where you can go and, maybe for a nominal monthly fee or whatever, listen in a high resolution, stream or file format to stuff that has not ever been commercially available. You're starting to see more streaming services come up. So hopefully some competition amongst these streaming services can create more opportunities for music fans to hear more stuff. I'm surprised that labels didn't succeed in setting up their own streaming services back in the day. If you've got this massive back catalog of classic artists, it would seem like that would be the way to go. I think we'll continue to see the disaggregation of digital music. iTunes, the ironic thing to me is that Steve Jobs, who styled himself as a tech rebel, sort of a man of the people, took this technology back from the people and handed it back to the suits. the record labels were far more comfortable with one distributor, and Jobs made them feel real comfortable with his closed architecture hardware and all that. And they felt more protected. So I'm glad to see that Apple's stranglehold on music is starting to weaken a little bit. So you have services like Amazon and even Spotify and that type of thing. So hopefully, as stuff kind of splinters a little bit, there'll be a better deal for music fans and more opportunity for artists to get paid. I would hope that that's part of what's next, because I feel like artists are really kind of getting the short end of the stick, as we touched on in the streaming era. So you can only put up with that for so long, and people start going and doing other things. If you just can't make a living, doing music, then you just won't do it. You'll go do something else. So I hope that that's sort of part of what's next is, giving some power back to the artists and the fans. And that was the promise, I think, of Napster, is that, this was a victory for the little guy. And unfortunately, it hasn't quite played out like that. So I'm hoping that can be, sort of part of the future. But from a tech standpoint, I really don't know. I guess it would have to be something new that comes along that can then carry music and broadcast it. I joked about some telepathic file sharing, right? Like you and I can just stand next to each other and share the music between our brains. Who knows? Yeah. Do you have thoughts on the technology side and where it might be going?
I always try to look at what the younger people are doing. What really drives, or what will really drive technology, is how they get information. They primarily use their phone. They have these iPads. Laptops are becoming less and less popular. Desktop computers, I should say, desktop computers are almost obsolete, basically. And when's the last time you walked into someone's house and they had a desktop? They have a laptop, they have an iPad, right. They have their phone. So I think what's going to drive any new technology is how people get information. So like when somebody, buys a phone, right? I think what you're going to start seeing is, buy this phone and get the free download of the new Metallica album, or buy this phone and get.
Yeah, I know Nokia tried something like that. Yeah. It was like a bundle Nokia phones, like back in the day.
Yeah, or sign up with Verizon and get exclusive content through that you can't get on the album of this artist or something like that. And I think that's going to start happening. And I think that's a revenue stream that I think that's been untapped, because you got cell phone companies, you got record companies that are making a lot of money, that I think it might even benefit the artist to say, hey, I'll do that, but I want X amount of dollars to do that. And I think that's a good way for the mega stars to do it. Now, here's one thing that I think really needs to start happening. When these big stars or these big bands get these deals, right? How about giving a little crumbs to the unknown guys? Like, okay, you get access to my music, but here's like 5 other bands that are new, that are going to be under my shell or under my umbrella, that if you get this service or if you buy this, you're going to have access to their music. I think that is something that I'd like to see happen, because it's very difficult for these new artists to get any traction on what they're doing. And I think it's going to take a big boy. I read an article about possibly next year, Iron Maiden and Judas Priest touring together. I'm like, wow, that's going to be fantastic. It's going to be Priest's 50th anniversary, and Maiden's going to have a new album. This is going to be great. I'm totally going to check it out. And then I read where Testament is going to be the opener. And nothing against Testament. I think they're a great band. But why not fill that bill with an unknown or a band out of the UK that's having trouble getting noticed? That's a really good band. Why not use it that way? Take that band on the road for 30, 40 shows to get exposure. I don't think that happens enough. I don't think Iron Maiden and Judas Priest need Testament to help them sell tickets. I don't think they need that, just like if Journey and Def Leppard had Cheap Trick opening up for them on some tours. I don't think they need Cheap Trick to help them sell tickets. Bring an unknown, bring an artist out there that's got 1 or 2 albums that's really good that, you're both fans of, both bands are fans of, that they want people to be exposed about. I think, I'm getting off on a little bit of a rant here, but that needs to happen more. And, if one band has a specific, or, you can only hear their music on Spotify. You can only hear Metallica's music on Spotify, let's say. Well, if you go purchase Spotify, not only do you get Metallica, but you've got 6 other bands access to their music as part of that bundle and help them get exposed. I think that needs to start happening a lot more. And I don't know if there's going to be, it's like you said, the technology, but I think it's going to be how we absorb information. The more advanced phones get, the more advanced iPads get, the more you can, get it on your watch now and get information off of your digital watch or whatever. I think there's, whatever keeps coming down the road and how people keep absorbing information. I was told years ago, if you want to know what's going to be successful, if you can predict just look around you, look around what people are doing. And sooner or later, what they're doing, the masses will start to enjoy, or the masses are starting to enjoy. That's what, you should always, if you're investing money, what should I buy stock in? Well, look around you. What are you enjoying? What are you utilizing? And if that is a product that is good, that you think it's got that's got a long shelf life, then that's what you go with. So,
and as you mentioned before, watch what younger people are doing.
Right.
I mean, the whole Napster thing, was blowing up on college campuses and amongst teenagers running home to watch Total Request Live and then going on Napster and downloading the tunes. So you keep an eye on what the kids are doing. Can I have one last comment about the Napster legacy?
Absolutely.
Before we finish. Okay. So we even started this conversation on the premise of, what is the impact, of Napster on the music industry? Totally appropriate. But in many ways, the true legacy of Napster is social media. The technology that Sean Fanning created was then taken by Sean Parker. So after the Napster debacle, he did Friendster, right? So that's more of a social media, social networking type thing. And then he went on to be the first president of Facebook. And, so in a lot of ways, the internet that we have today is Sean Parker's vision of the internet that started, as a teenager on IRC, with Fanning, writing, the code and creating the platform. So, the Napster legacy is far beyond, I think, the impact that it had on the music industry and, just the peer-to-peer thing and the decentralized file system, created this platform that social media, has been built on. So I think it's important to look at it from that standpoint too, that it's more than just about music. It's, about this thing that we are now wrestling with, called social media.
It's interesting. Yeah, I think you're correct on that. That's a great point of view. When you think about how it advanced, you mentioned like these communities online, that really was the catalyst for how we surf the internet now and what we do with social media.
Yeah, how we absorb information, as you say.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you for sharing that. Well, cool. Once again, like I said, it was a great conversation. Real quick, what are you listening to now? What's got your fancy with music?
Well, one of your past guests, Ari, turned me on to Joyous Wolf. So I've been listening to Joyous Wolf. I've been listening to the Glam Skank, as I've mentioned. And actually, I've been dipping into Patti Smith's body of work. I saw her recently. Just such a powerful performer and just a world-class artist. So I've been, I was at Horses and Easter, but I've been getting into more of her work. So that's been real interesting. And and Cheap Trick. You mentioned Cheap Trick. I actually saw them not too long ago, so I've been listening to some Cheap Trick as well. And the new Tool just kills. I mean, it's been 13 years, but it's been worth the wait, man. It's a great record.
Yeah, I did get a chance to check that out at a friend's house last week. He was playing it, and it sounds fantastic. It's just incredible. Check out this band. It's a band that's no longer around right now. They broke up recently, like last year. The lead singer's putting together a solo outfit. But check out the band Biters.
What's it called?
Biters. Biters. Okay. They're kind of like if you like Cheap Trick, if you like Thin Lizzy, if you like, it's got a little bit of that LA 80s scene vibe to it, but it's got a heavy influence of Cheap Trick and Thin Lizzy. I think you'll really like it.
Yeah, and I just heard a little bit of this band called 69 Eyes. Real interesting, kind of trippy, heavy stuff. And let's not forget the unfortunate passing of Rick Ocasek in the car. So I've been listening to a lot of his music. Now, I would say I'd hear about Eddie Money too, but I sort of like soured on Eddie's music. So I'd like to get back into some of that because I'm sure there's a lot of Eddie stuff that I didn't hear before that would be awesome too. Yeah. No, I mean, as we get older, our heroes from yesteryear are going onto the other side. Rick Ocasek, Eddie Money. More and more of these artists that we grew up listening to are just getting older and having health problems, and it's just I guess a reality check for us and a realization that nothing is forever. That's right. Yeah, I don't know what's going on with Eddie Van Halen either. I know Dave's been talking about, David Lee Roth's been talking about, he's the face of Van Halen. Now, I don't know if Eddie's having health problems, more health problems or whatever. So that's why, we've got to go out and see these guys when they play because, you just don't know. I remember when Motorhead played here, the last time. I was like, I'll catch him next time. And then Lemmy died 2 weeks later. I had the same thing. Yeah. I was like, tickets are too expensive for this Eagles thing, whatever. And then Glenn Frey died. I'm like, well, I wish I would have spent the, $175 to go to the show. Yeah, no, the Motorhead thing was disappointing. I had an opportunity to go see Tom Petty at Wrigley Field, and I passed that up. So yeah, no, I've been on the end of not making the right decision when I was given the opportunity to go see someone live, and then a few months down the road, they passed on. Yeah, so people make fun of me because they're in like Dinosaurs of Rock tour, and I'm just like, yeah, hey man, I don't know much longer they're going to be around. Like, check them out now. No, absolutely. Guys that didn't see in their prime, Yeah, no, it's like I said, man, nothing lasts forever. And, when you see an artist like that we grew up with pass on, it brings back a lot of memories. I had really not listened to the Cars in a long time. Like it's got to be over a decade. And then Rick Ocasek died, and I started listening to some of the stuff that I grew up with. And I'm like, wow, this is really good. And then, of course, the Fast Times at Ridgemont High scene with Phoebe Cates, absolute staple of pop culture in that scene. That whole movie is. Mm-hmm. And then I'm like, wow. I'm like, yeah, I totally remember that. And then listening to, I remember hearing "Shake It Up," all that stuff growing up in the early '80s, mid '80s, and just the great songwriting. Really great sonically. That's one thing that people really haven't mentioned about the Cars is great songs. Mm-hmm. Real simple songs, but how they really recorded their music. I mean, it really sounds great. I mean, even back then, it sounded awesome. Yeah, no, absolutely. And Rick and the Cars were video pioneers, right, as well. And Rick was a sort of Renaissance man in a lot of ways. And I'd invite people to check out my remembrance of him on 360degreesound.com because he was really important to me. Yeah, I was 14, 15 when guitars first broke, and it was from the future. Like everything I was listening to at the time seemed like it was from some glorious past, But the Cars were like, these guys are clearly from the future, and it felt like it was just for me and my friends,
Right.
Then it had that element of of 50s song structures and 70s guitar based rock, but it was sort of like towed the 70s into the 80s, with synthesizers and keyboards and expressionist lyrics and all that type of thing. I mean, I was just like, what in the world is this, man? This is awesome.
Yeah.
So I was really sad to hear of his passing.
And getting back to Van Halen, the thought of never seeing Eddie Van Halen on a stage again is something that I'm starting to realize that actually may be a possibility.
Yeah.
And that's
why, even though I was never, as you know from the poll, not a big fan of Van Halen, my thing has always been, if Eddie Van Halen is playing, the room should be packed. Because this is like having the opportunity to see Hendrix play, and these great guitar innovators. And, I hope he's able to play, and continue to tour and that type of thing, because he's just that important to fans of guitar rock.
Think about what Van Halen meant to pop culture in the 80s. I mean, that was a scene in itself. You have this guitar player that just changed the game of guitar playing with the tone, with the way he played. And then Van Halen had the image, right? The way they dressed, the way they looked. Daily Roth was this caveman with blonde hair that just had this huge personality. You had videos that meant so much to that time. Hot for Teacher, Panama, all that stuff. I mean, I remember the painter's caps, the T-shirts. I mean, it was a rite of passage when you were a kid walking around school with a Van Halen shirt or a Van Halen poster in your room. I mean, it was, the U.S. Festival 83, the huge impact on rock music after that festival, and how Van Halen was the headliner, and how 1984 was a catalyst to so many things in that decade. From a band that went from guitar bass to added a keyboard element, and it still maintained its fan base. And say what you want, I know you're not a fan of Sammy Hagar, Van Halen, but to have a band, and that's mostly because of Eddie. Let's not forget, I mean, Daily Roth was a huge personality. So was Sammy Hagar. But the reason why they were able to maintain a level of popularity with Sammy Hagar after Daily Roth left was because of Eddie. And, even if you just listen to the guitar in the Sammy Hagar era, I mean, again, it's innovative. It's great. It's fantastic. Yeah. I mean,
I just had a thought while you were talking. I'm like, how cool would it be to just have the guitar parts from every Van Halen song with no bass, no drums, no vocals, no keyboards, just hear Eddie just raw.
Yeah.
That'd be interesting. Yeah. I'd love to try that.
I don't think there's been a guitar player since Eddie that's changed the game. I mean, Jack White's got a little bit of a different style, but it's also a familiar style, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's kind of retro inspired.
Got
that Cream of Clapton sort of thing going on.
Right. But changing how people played and how their instrument sounded. I mean, I've read interviews such as one with Neil Schon, how Van Halen was on tour with opening up for Journey, and he would watch Eddie every night, and he'd be like, how's this kid doing it? Like, what's this kid doing? Like, he even asked him, like, show me how to play that. And if you look at Journey's guitar tone after that tour, it's completely different. Listen to the song Stone in Love by Journey on Escape. Listen to Keep on Running off that album. Listen to those deep cuts, Mother, Father, all those songs off of that album, even into Edge of the Blade and some of the songs off Frontiers. That's Eddie Van Halen right there. I mean, that's how much he impacted. All these guys that were playing in the 70s wanted to sound like that. They wanted to have that that tone that he had. And just to
the only other guy that I can think of, maybe be the Edge.
Yeah.
But that's more of a technology thing than really a technique thing.
Right. Yeah, it's just sad to realize, as being a Van Halen fan from that first moment I heard "Running with the Devil" when I was 7, 8 years old, to knowing that that might be it. It might be done, because the opportunity was there this summer to do it, and there was this huge talk about having Michael Anthony come back and do it. And
so great.
It's, if nothing's announced after, if they don't do it next year, I think it's done. I don't see it happening.
Yeah.
So
that'd be great to have Michael back. I mean, I've never understood what happened. Why he's so been pushed out of that thing. But I'm hoping to go to CES this year, and just so happens that David Lee Roth is doing a Vegas residency during that first week in January, or second week in January, when CES is happening. So,
there you go.
It would be cool. Yeah, cool to see David Lee. That guy is amazing. I've listened to his podcast. I mean, that's just off the chain. I love that guy.
Yeah, no, he's definitely a great listen to for his podcast. A brilliant guy, just a genius of creativity. Just how he explains things and how he presents a story is remarkable. He does an excellent job.
Background. Mm-hmm. His background, sort of his vaudeville. I had no idea, that he was, kind of came out of that kind of vaudeville tradition. I guess that shed new light on, why a barbershop quartet breaks out in the middle of "I'm the One,"
Yeah, right? Or "Happy Trails," "If Diver Down."
Yeah, right.
So, yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, you look at a lot of their influence, and you hear, artists in the 70s in some of their songs, but you really hear a lot of Dave Clark 5. You really hear a lot of Beach Boys, mm-hmm. especially in their background vocals, right?
That's an unsung hero of Van Halen. Certainly in the Dave era, was the 3 and 4 part harmonies that they did.
I mean, think
incredible.
About that.
And just, Eddie and Michael as a background vocal tandem, unrivaled.
Think about that. 3, 4 part harmonies, this guitar legend just shredding, and this maniac lead singer. It was the whole package. It really was. Think about that. Usually bands are made up of, the singer's front and center, and you have the guitar player, because all the guitar players, and then drummer is usually the third, and the bass is like a forgotten guy in most bands, right? And this was just all 4 guys just taking it to you and playing and, creating a whole music scene. I mean, they were predominantly responsible for creating that LA scene. They came out of that in the late 70s, and then all those bands started playing the clubs, and Van Halen was a huge catalyst for that. I mean, you even look at the U.S. Festival in '83, the 2 opening bands were LA-based bands, Quiet Riot and Motley Crue.
Mm-hmm. That's how David Lee Roth had a cameo in The Dirt, in the Motley Crue movie. Because, those guys, you're absolutely right. They set the table for, sort of the glam metal that came later in the 80s with LA Guns and Quiet Riot and Twisted Sister and all that.
Tommy Lee mentions in The Dirt, I think it's Tommy Lee, how David Lee Roth could walk through a room of people at a party, get bumped and knocked into, and never spill the cocaine off of his mirror. He's like, he could walk from one room to the other.
That's apocryphal. That's beautiful.
But just to have that comment, like he can get knocked into and pushed and just maintain and not spill an ounce of the drug off of the mirror that he was going to snort the lines off of. That's pretty funny.
There's a beverage here, man.
Well, all right, man. It's been a blast once again. Chris Bisha at 360 Degree Sound on Twitter, 360 degreesound.com for his blog. Check out the latest blog about Rick Ocasek. It's really cool. His other blogs are very well written and very well presented. Great guest, as always. We've got some things cooking between us that we hope to bring with you very soon. We'll be talking about that offline, and look for that in the future. But once again, thanks, Chris.
I appreciate you having me on. All
right. Well, hey, I appreciate you doing this. Once again, this is Jay Scott, and you're listening to The Hook, the Ultimate Rock Community Podcast. We'll talk once again. Thank you.